Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 18th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Vin Cipolla, the president of the Municipal Art Society of New York. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you so much, Ken. Pleased to be here.
All right, so venerable organization, but for a lot of our viewers, they don't know the Municipal Art Society from the Municipal Credit Union.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So what is the MAS?
We're an advocacy organization that works hard for a more livable New York, a more beautiful New York, a New York where neighborhoods are clean and functioning, and we're a very old organization. We started in 1893 by a group of artists and designers who really wanted to see New York be everything that it could be a world-class city. And so for all these years, plus 120 years, we've been advocating for a more livable New York.
So it's really not about art. It's not municipally sponsored. It's a civic organization.
Yeah, it's
right?
a funny name, right? The municipal art, meaning the municipal arts, design, architecture, planning, those things, those tools that we use to plan for and make for a better city. And so that's where the name comes from. But we're a private organization. We're a civic organization in the city, one of the oldest, and we've done great. If I do say so, we've done great work over decades and decades.
I guess in the interest of good disclosure for our viewers, I should let them know that you have a number of committees that sometimes draft people to participate on them. One is the planning committee that looks at big projects. I've served on it for a number of years, although I must confess I haven't been very good at attending recently. But one of the things that the organization is best known for, I think, has been its involvement with Grand Central. Grand Central as a piece of infrastructure, Grand Central as a piece of architecture, Grand Central as a piece of the fabric of the city. So tell us where Grand Central has been and where it's going.
Well, I mean, it's very famous, the MAS relationship with Grand Central, because Grand Central had been challenged and would have been demolished if it were not for the actions of the Municipal Art Society and then board member of the Municipal Art Society, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And so Mrs. Onassis really took up the charge of saving Grand Central and fighting to be sure that it was saved and other landmarks like it be saved. And so in many ways, the Battle of Grand Central was the beginning of historic preservation in New York to a very large extent, or perhaps the codification of the landmarks law and historic preservation following the demolition of Penn Station about 12, 13 years before the Grand Central battle. It was the demolition of Penn Station, which really, as we all know, kicked off the establishment of landmarks law after the appalling destruction of that magnificent piece of civic infrastructure.
There's also two of what I think are my favorite accomplishments, and both of them incidentally having to do with light. One was, and I don't think most people realize this, that those giant billboards in Times Square are actually required by the government. It's not that Coca-Cola or anybody else just came up with the idea. The owners of those buildings are required to have those giant signs, and that's because of the Municipal Art Society.
That's right, keeping the lights on in Times Square. That was a big MAS campaign. There had been an urban renewal in the works for Times Square, and the urban renewal would have rendered Times Square into looking like in a suburban industrial office park. I mean, if you were to look now at those plans of what was intended for Times Square, what some had hoped Times Square would have become, you would have been appalled.
Squeeze the life out of the heart of the city.
Completely, just a bunch of boring sameness buildings, no light, no neon, no what we know to be Times Square. And so MAS did leave a brilliant effort to keep the lights on in Times Square and basically keep Times Square, and have it be this hub of vibrancy and activity and also entertainment, which is what we all know Times Square to be.
And then tribute to lights, the annual remembrance at the anniversary of the terrible attack of September 11th, those giant beacons of light that go up into the sky that I think bring a lot of comfort to many of us who lived in the city at the time of the Trade Center attack. Is that going to be a permanent installation? Is that something that 100 years from now that we think will still be part of the fabric of our city?
Well, we very much hope so. I mean, Tribute and Light was the result of great work on the part of many people, and it was a partnership. It became a partnership of the Municipal Art Society and Creative Time that actually established those first illuminations, and then MAS really became responsible for the annual illumination of Tribute and Light, and now it's the 9/11 Memorial and Museum that is helping producing Tribute and Light as part of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum program. And so it's I believe the intention of everybody involved to keep the lights illuminated every year. They're extraordinarily powerful and such a poignant, incredibly brilliant, I think, really globally recognized memorial to September 11th.
Okay, so you saved Grand Central, you saved Times Square, and you helped us heal after September 11th. What have you done for us lately?
Well, we're working for a new Penn Station, actually. That's a pretty big deal. I mean, we're doing many things. But Penn Station is something that needs to be addressed. The original station, which it's still pretty much the new original station, so the result after the demolition was a substructure under Madison Square Garden, as we all know, that was designed for maybe, I don't know, 120, 150,000 people a day. Then they made some improvements so that it could accommodate a capacity of maybe 200,000 people a day. It's right now moving 650,000 people a day. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Penn Station needs to be redeveloped. It needs to be recreated. It's not sustainable in any way. It's not sustainable infrastructure, no matter how one wants to define sustainable. And so we've been very involved in trying to do our part to put the city and the state and the country on a path to recreate, redevelop Penn Station. That requires moving Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So I remember getting a call from one of your staff a few months ago saying, in effect, technicalities aside, that Madison Square Garden's lease was up and the city of New York had to renew it. Not exactly a lease, and that MAS thought that they ought to only get another 10 years, and after that they were going to have to move. And it seemed like a crazy idea to me. It actually seemed to have gotten some traction and caught on. But for a preservation organization, why do you want Madison Square Garden to move?
Well, Madison Square Garden is an extraordinarily important, iconic place, and we all have, each one of us has our Madison Square Garden story, right? I mean, we love Madison Square Garden. This city, Manhattan deserves Madison Square Garden. This is the fourth location of Madison Square Garden. But it is unfortunate that the garden sits on top of Penn Station, and basically Penn Station is the foundation for Madison Square Garden. There are over 1,100 columns which come down from that stadium, or that arena rather, that are onto those tracks and platforms that support the garden. So the only way you can get in there to really deal with improving Penn Station is to really address the garden itself. And the garden has had a lot of issues in terms of its physical plan. It doesn't have proper loading. And now it's competing with the Barclays Center, which is a AAA, first class operation with all the appropriate arena amenities you need to have. And so getting a new Madison Square Garden, brilliant, means also getting a new Penn Station. So it's a win-win. And it will help with the revitalization of Midtown West, which is, frankly, depressed from Penn Station, because Penn Station is not again, it's a miserable experience, and it keeps the city dampened in that area.
Going back to the late Senator Pat Moynihan, there have been plans and plans to make plans, and sometimes there's money and sometimes there's not, to do something about Penn Station going back decades. Kidding aside, what makes you think that a realistic plan can be put together with all of the stakeholders, as complicated as it is, in a mere 10 years?
This is a city of extraordinary development. Grand Central in the terminal city, Central Park, the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan. This is a town that does extraordinary things. We can do this. We can build a new Penn Station.
And a new Madison Square Garden.
And a new Madison Square Garden. All over the world, other cities have taken on building great new stations and infrastructure, creating new entertainment complexes. We can do this. The real estate in that part of the city, if the potential of that real estate were fully unlocked, is so extraordinarily valuable. I mean, look at the demographics. Look at the adjacent development. Hudson Yards, for example, right on the doorstep of Penn Station. Can Penn Station really meet the needs of Hudson Yards? Nobody thinks so. So this is very, very complex. There is a tight timeline now that the City Council has accepted the 10-year special operating permit for the garden itself. And so, but this is a city that can get these kinds of things done. As I said, it really isn't an if, it's a when. It has to happen. It's a lot of moving parts over there. And on Moynihan Station, on the Farley Post Office, that was always envisioned as a home for Amtrak. That needs to continue to come online. The first phase now is underway. And remember, there's East Side access, the Long Island Railroad coming into the Grand Central neighborhood. We have these different big transportation infrastructure activities that are going on right now. The timing is right to really get into Penn Station and deal with that problem.
But where does the money come from? Governor Christie, not that long ago, killed off another tunnel under the Hudson River because he was afraid that if there were cost overruns, New Jersey would get stuck with it, since the federal government was no longer a reliable partner for large infrastructure projects. Who has to pay what in order for this vision to become reality?
Well, there is a lot of available in the realm of financing. The commercial real estate volume and benefits in that area are astounding. And we could go into a very sort of detailed look at the mosaic of what's over there, but there's a lot of money to be made in redeveloping Midtown West. We do have a lack of vision in this country about infrastructure. And when you look at our funding, or you look at our miles of for example, high-speed rail in the U.S., it's zero, compared to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles in other countries we don't consider to be our equivalent. So all these pieces, these are tough pieces. They all really do need to come together, but money, to me, is not the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle, really, because there's a lot of different mechanisms that can be unlocked. The larger hurdle is really organizing the geography from a planning standpoint, and you would very much appreciate this, to make room for everything that needs to be made room for. But even when you look at that, there's plenty of room. It's a question of creativity. We had a very interesting provocation where we invited 4 of the world's best firms to take a look at that neighborhood and take a look at Penn Station. We unveiled those ideas earlier this year at the Times Center. And those firms came up with some brilliant ideas about how to reorganize that neighborhood for a new station and a new Madison Square Garden. These things can get done.
I want to talk a little bit more about Midtown West and Midtown East when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Vin Cipolla, president of the Municipal Art Society. We have had one mayor for the last almost 12 years. He has had 3 deputy mayors. Dan Doctoroff, his first deputy mayor for economic development, focused a lot of his attention on the notion that we, as to be a global city, we needed to have new modern office buildings, a new neighborhood as close to the Hudson River as possible, Hudson Yards, the idea of a football stadium, but it was really about building a new neighborhood. Bob Lieber, who succeeded him, was focusing on what we're calling the Midtown West, not quite as far as the Hudson River, closer to 8th Avenue and the area around there. And that was going to be the place where we were going to have these new skyscrapers and things to attract the global business community. Then Bob Steele became the deputy mayor, and we moved further east, all the way over to Midtown East on the other side of 5th Avenue. And the notion is that that's the neighborhood where we should create zoning incentives so we can have brand new giant buildings to meet the needs of the global economy. So which one of them had it right? What should we be doing first?
Well, I mean, in both cases, right, we have a station and a terminal. So we have the two major transportation hubs of the city. So the fact that deputy mayors would look first to those areas where there's substantial transportation is a good thing, not a bad thing. And so how do we make the best of what is the Penn Station neighborhood? And we were just chatting, of course, about Penn, and you can't do that without really dealing with Penn. So you know where we stand on that. And then around Grand Central, the Grand Central neighborhood does need to be revisited. I think those of us that are interested in the public realm, and MAS's primary interest around Grand Central has been in the public realm, and the fact that we have not paid sufficient attention to the public realm, below ground and above ground. And so any rezoning that might take place in East Midtown really has to deal with public realm and also what's happening in the connectivity of public infrastructure, particularly given the fact that East Side Access is going to be opening up in a few years.
Right, so this is a new train line coming from Long Island, bringing
Right.
people into Grand Central on the Long Island Railroad. It's actually a station that's being built
It
underneath
is
the
180 feet below
station.
Park Avenue.
So can that part of Manhattan have more people on the stairs of Grand Central, on the sidewalks surrounding that area? Is more density really even physically possible over there?
Well, there has to be commensurate investment in infrastructure and in public realm, and this is where the tension is, where the great concern is. I mean, the city is going to continue to grow, and we can't approach the city as a city in formaldehyde. And it isn't Paris; it's a different place. And we have cleared the way, if you will, for extraordinarily tall new buildings in parts of the city that have less transportation infrastructure than East Midtown. So to think that it's going to be frozen is not really the right idea, but to think that it's going to be nothing but tall buildings is also the wrong idea. And so what's the balance between the two? Part of what supports a balance is an investment in infrastructure and in public realm. At MAS, when the city first announced that it wanted to approach a rezoning for East Midtown, we got right into the public realm conversation. We brought on 3 fantastic firms to look at the public realm challenges and provoke or suggest some solutions. And we came out with a very, I think, well thought out and serious analysis about what needed to be, the questions that needed to be asked and some of the available solutions for the public realm piece. And so whether there's more tall buildings or not tall buildings in East Midtown, of course there will be more over time. We need to address these very important existing conditions of congestion in East Midtown and clear the way for a better environment.
So this is all very complicated.
So complicated.
And expensive and takes a long time to do and has ramifications that can last for generations. I've heard you talk about the need for experts. I've heard you talk about the need for a plan, and I've heard you talk about the need for political leadership to make some of the tough decisions and balance some of these things. Where does the public fit into all of this, and how does MAS engage with people? Because it doesn't seem to me that simply writing a report and putting it on a shelf gets things done.
We want to make it really easy for people to participate. I mean, I think if there's something very fundamental that we stand for and that we believe in, and that is the conversation of the civic sector, of civil society. And making it easy for people to participate in these important issues is really a big part of what we see as our job to do. We do that right now through a variety of ways, everything from social media to the convenings that we host, and the big convening that we're going to be hosting next week called the MAS Summit for New York City.
What's that?
Now in our 4th year. The MAS Summit is a conversation about city building in New York. It's a conversation about the design challenges and really the challenges to the city that are in front of us, or opportunities if you want to look at it that way. It's 110 speakers. It has over 1,000 registrants. It's live streamed, so anybody can watch it anywhere in the world and participate. And it's really to make transparent, to really make public what are these great questions that are facing the city and some of the solutions that are being proposed to answer those questions. I'm a technology entrepreneur. That's a big part of my background, and I've come to public sector work. This is the 3rd NGO that I've taken great leadership
Non-governmental
role in.
organization.
Non-governmental, and the relationship between making it easy for people to participate in technology, for me, is a pretty seamless relationship. And I think that we are living in a very exciting time where data is ubiquitous, where information is available, where people can participate much more freely. The barriers to participation have really come down. And I think we are living in an intensively more democratized world. And I think bureaucracies still stand in the way, remarkably, of democratization. But I think that we are there to encourage people to talk and participate.
So every one of the very large-scale developments, and I don't mean that in a technical sense, but the idea of a Grand Central, which part of Manhattan should be developed next, moving Penn Station or Madison Square Garden. Everything we've talked about up until this point has been in Manhattan. Now, it's the economic engine that drives the city. It's where the jobs are. It's where the tax revenue comes from. But my sense is that over the last decade, a lot of the vitality of the city, the resurgence of the city, has been in waterfront neighborhoods in Queens. It's been in Brooklyn, not just in the waterfront, but in central Brooklyn. So what do you think the biggest challenges are for the boroughs other than Manhattan, and how engaged is MAS in helping those challenges get met?
Well, if the entrepreneurs can't afford to live in Manhattan, they're going to take their entrepreneurship elsewhere, right? So we're seeing the great longtime residents of Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island and the Bronx doing the creative things that those longtime residents have always done. And then we're also seeing the flight of entrepreneurs to other places because they can't really be entrepreneurial in Manhattan. I mean, when I started my first company in New York, which was a very long time ago, I think I benefited from certain conditions in that city that don't really exist anymore. I mean, I didn't pay, I paid a lot of rent at the time, but I paid a lot less rent in relative terms to my income than my age equivalent would today. And I started a business in space that was, again, in relative terms, was a lot cheaper than anything one could find today. So, I think these conditions have changed.
Right, but we now have a condition of increasing income inequality, a disappearing middle class, a sense that people can't afford to stay in their neighborhoods as they improve around them. What does the MAS say to the residents of those neighborhoods who feel that they're being squeezed out of New York by New York's success?
Affordability is a huge issue. It has to be central to any of the policy work that we do at MAS, and it is. We do something called the MAS Survey on Livability in New York City, which is supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. This is our 4th year of doing that, and we'll report the results next week. And that survey really looks at gathering data on many of the questions that you're asking. So balanced, high performance. We could say resilient, or we could say high performance. We'd pick your lingo, but balanced urban policy, smart urban planning that considers these forces that have been underway and trying to plan in a way that mitigates these forces from getting out of control. Because if we become an unaffordable place, if we become a place where people that are can't find their way, can't find movement, socioeconomic movement, then we've lost. We're going to lose, we care about being a global city, the world leader, we'll lose that. Because this being a city for everyone is absolutely what is most essential.
So tell us the website, since you're a technology entrepreneur, if people want more information about the MAS.
Couldn't be simpler. It's mas.org. So mas.org.
My thanks to Vin Cipolla, the president of the Municipal Art Society of New York. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at cuny.tv.